So now that we've taken apart the exceptionally disappointing RX 6700 XT reference card, we're going to take apart the Sapphire Nitro Plus 6700 XT partner model. And that's this card here. Unfortunately, the 6700 XT pricing is just not good in general. It's too high. So you should probably buy something else if you can, but a lot of people can't, and that's why AMD charges whatever they want for MSRP floor pricing. Okay, so we're going to take apart the Nitro Plus, see how it looks from a cooling perspective and overall design, look at the cooler and make determinations as to whether it is significantly better than the reference design or not. It'd be pretty hard to not be better. Before that, this video is brought to you by Squarespace. Squarespace is what we've been using for years to manage our own Gamers Nexus store, and we've been incredibly happy with the choice. Squarespace makes e-commerce easy for those interested in starting stores, but it also has powerful tools to build all types of websites. Photo galleries for photographers, resume and portfolio sites, and small business sites are all easily done through Squarespace. Having built a lot of client websites the old way before running GN full-time, we can easily recommend Squarespace as a powerful, fast solution. Go to squarespace.com/gamersnexus to get 10% off your first purchase with Squarespace. So here's the Nitro Plus. The Sapphire Nitro line thus far in our work with it has been one of the higher end partner model cards we've looked at, including NVIDIA's. So NVIDIA and AMD partners alike, the Nitro card typically has been one that the other partners could look up to and try to emulate. So we last were impressed by one in the RX 5700 XT series. We saw one in the 6800 XT line that did well overall. And this one looks to be taking most of the same design motif, but also most of the same cooling approach as the predecessors. So I do have high hopes for the way this card looks right now for its design internally. You can see over here the what NVIDIA calls flow-through design. Of course, NVIDIA invented the idea of air moving through an object. Sapphire's been doing this for many years now. This is not new to Sapphire. It's been used in some NVIDIA cards as well, but very basic stuff at this point. The air goes through the Finstack and comes out the other side rather than bouncing off of a PCB. So it's just worth pointing out because NVIDIA's made such a big deal out of it. Finstack is oriented top to bottom, so you're going to get most of your exhaust expelled through this part of the heatsink with the bottom bouncing off of the motherboard. And on this side, there's actually a little bit of room for some exhaust to come out from that side fan because the Finstack does not obstruct it. So Sapphire didn't bring the Finstack all the way over to the I/O slot. And since there's holes in the I/O slot, there's room for some of that to be exhausted. For the top, I'm only seeing one screw, so we're actually going to start here. Normally we start by taking the card apart, but this is actually the feature that makes me the most happy to work with the Nitro line as opposed to many of the other cards we take apart. And the feature, is that a Phillips Zero? That's a Phillips Zero. We're getting all these screwdrivers out of our teardown toolkit, by the way, which is in stock and shipping now. It's on store.gamersnexus.net. It has all the screwdrivers you'll need for most of the GPUs on the market, including this one from what I can see right now. So these fans, this is something XFX has done in the past as well with the Ghost series. But, yep, there we go. That's what I like to see. Okay, cool. Great start for Sapphire here. So it's got a QC mark on it and some cardboard. But this fan is a socketable fan. So it's a pin-to-pad placement. These are a little more, they're more expensive to do, partly because of the tolerance for the pin-to-pad setup and the cost of materials as opposed to doing the cables. The cabling approach is the most common. With 3 fans, though, that gets really messy. And what a lot of companies will do, like EVGA, is they'll run one cable from each of the fans, all bridged to some messy daisy-chained connector, and then run that into the board. Or sometimes you'll see each with its own header on the board, which is now taking a lot of PCB space to do. And this obviously does need to connect to the board still, because it still needs to get controlled by the board and get power from the board. But pin-to-pad's nice because when the fan dies, and the fan is the most common failure, you can email Sapphire, say in 5 years from now, and say, hey, my fan died, and you can tell them I'm confident I can remove one screw and socket a fan, and they'll just mail you a fan. And it saves everyone time, and it saves them money, because then they're not shipping the card back and forth. So this is what we like to see. It's just a higher quality of component or build for something that's actually a meaningful feature. And there it is. That's all there is to putting it back. Okay, let's take a look at the rest of this. Any BIOS, there's a BIOS switch right there. So you can see the PCB is not making use of the full height of the card and the cooler, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, just an observation. But I see a cable in there with some daisy chaining going on, and then I see a BIOS switch. The default position is towards the I/O. That's going to be important for us later, and I'm actually going to mark that. We normally try to keep a record of where it's pointed so that we can restore it to defaults if needed. These are spring tension screws. Sapphire likes to do this on their cooler designs just to get the right mounting force on them. So those are going to hold the back plate to the cold plate. That's going all the way to the not the cold plate, but the Finstack on the other side. These screws are coming in from the PCB side. So those are going to secure the back plate to the PCB. And then these are going into the cold plate. So we're going to release these first. It's going to be a Phillips 0. This is a pretty large card, but the board is a standard length. So it does cut off here. A lot of that extra sizing is to fit the third fan both vertically and horizontally. That's why it's so tall too. Those fans, 2 of them look like they're maybe 90 mil or 100 even, and then the other one's a little bit smaller than that. We'll measure those in a second. So there are 2 tamper seals on here, but they're not warranty void stickers. We're fine with that. Typically when companies do this, it's in theory to help them diagnose if it has been tampered with, but not necessarily reject a warranty. At least that's what they tell us, but you can always take the sticker off if you're worried about it and tell them it wasn't on there. Let's get a couple of other screws out. So that's holding the Finstack to this side of the PCB. That has to come out. There's that giant spring tension screw. So this is part of the retention kit for the cooler. Actually, a little hole right there. I'm curious to see why. It looks like it's just to accommodate an MLCC or something. Okay, and then we've got 2 more screws. So actually, I don't think you need to take too many screws out to get this cooler off. These 2 would be the ones next. Yep, all right, cool. There's 2 more left. That's gonna be these 2 over here. It's pretty good. Okay, so there's a little bit more slack in these cables than the reference card. It's easier to disconnect them safely. This is a little bit odd. I'm not sure I would have made this choice, but that's an LED bridge, I think. Cool, so we're already down to the PCB and the cooler. This is what made the Nitro good in the last round of tests we did. So here's, just for perspective, here's the screws we took out for getting to the PCB. So 4 standard retention screws, 2 in the I/O plate supporting the plastic part of the cooler, and then we have another 6 that are for the back plate. Not too bad. This is AMD's reference design. Frankly, not bad because they're not weird screws. It's a lot of them, but Sapphire's design, and we'll see in testing, it'd be kind of fun to do pressure testing on these. Typically, Sapphire's design distributes the pressure fairly evenly, so we'll see. We have tools to test all that if people care, so let us know if you do. This cable over here that I disconnected, so that's just taped down, and this is actually for RGB. So that's what this light bar is. It's powered by this thing, and that's connected to an extension cable. Where is that? Oh, there it is. So there's the extension for that. I think that is actually leading to this. There's a PCB in here. How do I? So that PCB right there, that's going to the extension cable. That powers the LEDs. Okay, let's start with talking about the layout of this design. So first of all, this is not too uncommon, but it is fairly uncommon. Basically what they're doing is they're putting their, part of their, typically this would be the VRM heatsink, but so far it looks like it's just a memory heatsink. I don't think there's any VRM components hidden up here. So this looks like a VRAM heatsink, and when I take this off, we'll look at it closer. This has served Sapphire very well in the past. The reason this layout works well, we did a whole lot of thermal testing on this for the 5700 XT series, and the reason it works well is because you're now isolating effectively the heat capacity of your cold plate and your Finstack and heat pipes to more or less cooling the GPU core and some of the other hottest components, the MOSFETs. This means that the memory is not sharing, in the most literal sense, this cooling solution. It's not really connected. You can see here, there's actually some damage on some of these fins, not in a way that matters, just in a way that tells us a few things. And that is, right around here, there's some scratches. That's because the fins sort of socket together with some of the other fins, and they come very close to each other. But in the truest literal sense of it, they are not connected or intended to be connected in a major way, which would facilitate the transfer from the VRAM plate into what we'll call the primary cooling solution. And that works out well when you're working with something that's relatively, compared to the GPU, low power like memory, because this can be very effectively cooled if enough air gets into it. So if you have sufficient airflow over these fins and you have enough surface area here, and this is a lot compared to, for example, well, this for one, but compared to AMD's and the base plate for better example, there's how AMD's cooling their memory if you needed any evidence that Sapphire's done a better job. So this has worked well for Sapphire is what we're getting at. And that design's good because it isolates the things that are being cooled because everyone a dedicated solution. Heat pipes, it looks like 1, 2, 3, 4 at least. And this is it's a diagonally oriented silicon as opposed to typically it's square for AMD. But the end result is that we have 2 heat pipes that are going straight through the center. We have one heat pipe that's sort of cutting off this bottom corner here, and one that's cutting off this bottom corner, top corner. So overall, good distribution of heat pipes across the area of the highest concentration of power. For the VRM, the MOSFETs are contacting thermal pads. These, we should probably start taking note of these. Someone on Twitter specifically asked that we start logging thermal pad height, and I agree with them, so that others can easily maintain their cards later. These are 1mm pads. So 1mm pad into an aluminum plate into the fins, and that's all fairly standard. Should be fine. The fan cable ends up as a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think that's an 8-pin, although it looks like there's maybe 7 connected. And then we've got, actually, I'm not 100% sure how these are isolated. We'll need to take more of it apart. One looks like maybe TAC or something, or control. Power, so there's an 8 and a 6-pin. Okay. What I'm going to do now is take the backplate off so that we can then free this heatsink. These screws are all the same as each other, but not the same as the ones on the back. So don't mix them up if you dis and reassemble it. Nobody wants thermal pads on the giant metal thing they put on the back of their card, huh? So this plastic coating is just here for preventing direct contact, like the legs of the through-hole components or of the other SMDs on there. But there's your LED light box right there. Let's move that aside. These are the same as the ones on the top. We do have this thermal pad as a replacement if we need to replace some of these. And if you need to replace them, these are approximately 1 millimeter thick. It comes out to 0.8, but it's been compressed, so I would call that 1.0. Okay, so this is I was curious about this. This is Sapphire's 3-switch BIOS. They typically ship these with a silent mode, so that's going to maybe run a lower power target. I haven't checked this specific model yet for the power target options, but it's going to have normally a lower power target or at least a less aggressive RPM for the fans, a more aggressive one, potentially a higher power target for overclocking. They call it an OC mode normally. And then one switch, which is typically the center, but you can check the manual obviously, is for soft-through control. So that would be you use Sapphire's Tri-XX utility, and then you can tell it what you want it to do by using that third switch position. It's not technically triple BIOS, but it kind of behaves like that in a way. This is actually, I think, oh, is there? Oh, I just realized there's a thermal pad on the back. I take back my previous comments. Sapphire is aware that thermal pads help to some extent. So this is actually directly on the back side of the inductors. Inductors get really hot. There's the inductors, or the chokes, you might hear them called. It's just a copper coil inside of a shell. They do get hot. They can also run very hot, though. Let's get the thickness of that pad. It's a very large one, so the plate spaces it pretty far away. Wow. It's about 2.5. That's about 2.95. So factoring in compression, I'd call that a 3.0. That looks like 3 to me. It is actually a little more compressed on the lower side, probably just the way the backplate sits. So, okay, well, I would like to see thermal pads where the memory is still, but at least there's something on there. Back to the boards. That is the same, I think, yes. Is it the same MOSFETs too? 35217, 35217. So they're both using the same voltage controller. It's an international rectifier, 35217. And then the MOSFETs, I think, are the same. 649A, SIC 649A. Same MOSFETs, same controller. This is different on Sapphires over here. The Nuvoton controller, or however you say it. Memory placement, identical. So this is the AMD reference board design. Partners, in order to hit the market fast, will often use a reference board design rather than a full custom design. So the custom design, you might see it run taller to maybe accommodate a larger VRM or something like that. But AMD often overbuilds its reference designs, so Sapphire may have just said, you know what, that's good enough. Let's just hit the market as fast as we can and then put a really good cooler on it and hope that that's all we need. So this is mostly the same PCB, some exceptions. One of those exceptions is these, which these are just fuses. These are not really there to protect your card and keep it running, but they're there to help the technicians diagnose the problem, see if they can maybe fix the card, and help isolate where a failure might occur. We've shorted across these in the past to in air quotes, fix problems, but it'll get it back up and running again. Either way, though, that is nice to have as a feature for a quicker RMA pipeline. There's another one down here, and again, that's more of a helping Sapphire feature, but hopefully it's to the extent that it helps Sapphire get your stuff fixed faster. So, a couple observations. We can show this from our AMD reference card teardown too. So if you look at this side by side with the AMD card we took apart, both of them have this low spot. I think it's a low spot. We'll do pressure testing to determine if it's low or high, but just based on cleaning it earlier, it looked like a low spot in the silicon or in maybe just the way that the cooler's retained, but they both had that spot. This cooler, or this silicon, let's see, also has a very tiny coverage gap in the top center of the thermal paste. It's not too bad, but there's a small sliver up here that is not very well connected with the cold plate. We saw that on AMD also. As far as the cold plate goes, there it is. Just a piece of copper, no vapor chamber, nothing trying to be too fancy. It's copper with some nickel-plated copper heat pipes running through it. You've got a bit of a what EVGA calls a pinhole design here too, just noticing this. So in the heatsink, these holes that pierce through horizontally help with getting some of the air out the sides. This is good. It allows some contact to the inner surface area of the fins, but more importantly, it gives the air another path, so it's not only going vertically into the board and into the side panel of the case, which isn't a bad way to cool, it really isn't, but pushing some of the air out the sides is helpful too, because then, well, one, it can help deal with turbulent noise a little bit depending on the design of the cooler, but two, it just gives it another path to escape and get the air out as efficiently as possible. Those do not punch all the way through to the I/O side, but they punch through to this point. So they go down to about where the you run into the VRM right here. So it gives the air somewhere else to go. I think I realized I didn't read the actual fan model. So, and that's because this design is good enough that they'll just replace it for you. But if you want to replace one of these fans on your own, you don't want to go through Sapphire at some point, maybe they've stopped supporting the card in the distant future, then this specific one is made by or branded by NTK Hong Kong Limited. You don't necessarily need the same brand, but the model number does need to be the same. It's FDC10U12D9-C. It's 12 volts and it's 0.45 amps, which is actually fairly powerful for a fan of in this use case. Also made in January, which the fan supply, they're probably shipping to multiple customers, but that aligns with trying to rush these things through production right before Lunar New Year. So that's it for the Sapphire Nitro Plus teardown. Now, a couple takeaways here. The 6700 XT as a GPU is still too expensive for what it is. So instead of buying too high up the price category in the partner models, it might be worth instead looking at something like a 6800 or a 3070. Because once you start buying the high-end partner models for 6700 XT, you're gonna be close to those price brackets anyway, and they're better. As for what we learn here about Sapphire's design, we'll send all this stuff through formal testing if enough people care. We've kind of cut back on the partner model reviews over the last few months because it was just clear that the audience wasn't overall interested in them. If that's changed, let us know in the comments if you want to see a bunch of reviews of partner models, or even just a few. But the point is, this design, especially compared to reference, is significantly better. It's going to cost more. However, up the stack, if you end up scaling your budget, the 6800 XT Nitro or the 6800, some of the higher end Sapphire models, might be worth considering as an alternative if you're going to be spending more anyway, depending on what kind of class hardware you're looking at. So the Nitro Plus design is typically among Sapphire's most expensive, other than maybe the Toxic. But it is good. It's just when you're ultimately, your main goal is to get a card, any of them, it stops mattering quite as much. Design A versus B. This is, however, the better of the two that we've seen so far. We'll take apart the XFX card as well, and if we get more, we'll take those apart. But if you want to see more testing on thermals and power consumption overclocking, let us know in the comments, because at this point, that's what we're going to need to see to be convinced that it's worth working on these for full reviews, as opposed to just doing feature tests on them, just since people, you know, can't get a lot of the cards right now. So the reviews are going to be helpful eventually, but maybe not today. That's it for this one. Thanks for watching. You can subscribe for more. Go to store.gamersnexus.net if you want to pick up one of our toolkits or mouse mats. The toolkits are in stock and shipping now. Or you can go to patreon.com/gamersnexus if you'd like to get some behind-the-scenes videos. We'll see you all next time.